So in lesson 2, we're going to talk more about the chromatic scale, and for better or for worse, we're going to introduce some more musical terminology. Again, not in detail, but we need to know at least some musical terminology, and the terminology of the chromatic scale is crucial. So here is the chromatic scale. There are 12 intervals and 13 notes. This is a confusion that will I'll probably misspeak it sometimes, and you'll notice it in different things that you read. There are 12 intervals in the scale, but 13 notes, and so it's sometimes called a 12-note scale. That's a little confusing, but the basic idea is 12 intervals and 13 notes. These intervals all have a name, and they are tones played together, two tones played together. So unison, for example, and formally it's referred to as perfect unison, is playing the same note together. So if you're talking about a piano, you can't really play the same note with the same note on a piano. You need two pianos, but the same note on two pianos is unison. A minor second is the next note up in the chromatic scale. These intervals are all called semitones. We'll come back to that in a minute. The third interval, the third scale degree, is called the major second. Next one, the minor third, and so on through this list of 12 intervals. They all have names, and those names we'll use from time to time to indicate a musical dyad. Two notes played together, a note that's called the tonic note, we'll come back and talk about that a good deal, and the other note played with it, a higher note that defines the interval, the frequency distance between the tonic note, which begins the scale, and any one of these notes in the sequence that covers the octave. Again, the octave being a doubling of the fundamental frequency from the note that begins at the tonic note to a note that has a fundamental frequency twice the fundamental of the starting tonic note. These are the abbreviations. We'll sometimes be using these. And I'm going to leave out these other two columns. We'll come back and talk about tuning systems, and they're obviously critically important. How is it that you define the distance exactly between any one of these intervals that are dividing up the octave? And you'll see that's been a huge problem over literally millennia as people have debated what's the best way to divide the octave into semitones. What's the definition of the semitone? What is the unit between each of these intervals? And as we'll see, that remains a complicated issue. So there are three tuning systems that we're going to be talking about, but not for the moment. We'll let those go, those three, just to give you a sense of what's coming, are equal temperament Pythagorean tuning and just intonation tuning. I'll just mention here just intonation tuning because just intonation is tuning, well, they're all in a sense tuning systems that deal with ratios. So the ratios that are involved in the two notes in the chromatic scale, for unison, of course, it's 1:1. For the octave, it's 2:1. That's what I said, a doubling of the fundamental frequency. But each of these other intervals has a frequency ratio between the tonic and the higher note that's being played along with it, the dyad. Let me just write that down because we're going to be using that term. Dyad simply means the simplest possible chord that you can imagine playing two notes together, and playing two notes together is the essence of the chromatic scale, of the 12 notes of the chromatic scale. And again, just to come back and make the point because it's an important one, is the semitone. What's the proper definition of the interval that's more or less the same between each of these 12 intervals of the chromatic scale? Each semitone is approximately, depending on the tuning system that you are using, a 6% increment of the frequency of the tonic. The octave is a doubling of the frequency, a 100% increment. A 6% increment is approximately, again, depending on the tuning system, the distance between each of these 12 intervals in the chromatic scale. This is, of course, a piano keyboard just to indicate how these notes play out on a keyboard for those of you who are familiar with it. The abbreviations are put in here, unison, the octave, and all of the notes in between with their abbreviations. On the piano keyboard, of course, there are semitone differences. Those of you who are players will know each semitone being indicated by the movement to an adjacent key, be it a movement from white key to white key or white key to black key. The piano has empirically evolved so that the semitones are expressed in the movement to the next key on the keyboard. That's a semitone, and here's the layout of these terms in the chromatic scale illustrated on the keyboard for those of you who are familiar with it. So let's listen to the chromatic scale played by Ruby as just a auditory example of what the scale really sounds like.